All right. Good morning, North Bethany County Service District for Roads. So Chair Beachy, I'll turn it over to you for the call to order.
Gotta get a microphone over here. All right. For the North Bethany County Service District for Roads, I call this meeting to order.
All right. Thank you, Chair Beachy.
Chair Beachy, if I can just mention for members of the committee, before you speak, if you hit the push button on your mic, and then you can just speak and then turn it off, and we'll be here to help you too. Remember that.
Thank you, Miss Angie. So we'll do a quick roll call. Bruce Young.
Here.
Alicia Gruber.
Here.
Dan Reed.
Here.
Commissioner Treese.
Here.
Commissioner Rogers. Commissioner Willie.
Here.
Commissioner Fye.
Present.
Chair Harrington.
Here.
All right, and over to you, Chair Beachy.
All right. Sorry, let me get my papers in order here. So I think we'll have our budget presentation by Stephen Roberts, the Director of Land Use and Transportation.
Great. Thank you, Chair Beachy and committee members. I appreciate you being here with us today. I'm going to run through our budget presentation for the North Bethany County Service District for Roads. You can find the budget for this district in the budget summary book beginning on page 412. So I want to start with a little discussion about equity considerations in this district. So as I think you're familiar, the Board of Commissioners adopted an equity resolution that governs and directs work across the county. So this district is no different. So we are using equity to try to guide considerations to guide the work that we do in the district here. This district funds a specific list of projects that were identified by the Board of Commissioners in 2011 as a part of the planning for the North Bethany community. And the projects are delivered by the Land Use and Transportation Capital Project Services Division. And as with all of our projects that we do in our department, we seek to ensure that we're providing good language support for our public information and public community engagement. We seek to ensure that we have contracting opportunities available for minority and women-owned emerging small businesses or MWESB firms, and then firms that are certified through the Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, or COBID. So trying to help ensure that the funds are making their way to firms that will help increase diversity and inclusion in the construction community. And then finally, all of our projects generally will include pedestrian and or biking improvements, and in those we have accessible curb ramps, and so again we have an obligation to provide a system that is accessible to all members of our community, and that's another way that we help do that. The community on the projects that are identified in this particular district that are on transit, of course, we also provide transit stop amenities when we construct improvements on those roadways, and we do that work in conjunction with our partners at TriMet. So this map shows the North Bethany area, which is the blue area on the map. The larger gray area is what's known as the Bethany Community Plan area. That's a specific area that's identified in our community planning and land use documents. And the North Bethany sub-area is one component of that larger Bethany Community Plan. The North Bethany district itself is generally bounded by Springville Road on the south, 185th Avenue on the west, the urban growth boundary, and in some areas the Multnomah County line on the north and east. I'll note that the Portland Community College Rock Creek campus is included in this area. The area known as Arbor Oaks is not. It was an earlier urban growth boundary expansion that was not included in the North Bethany Community Plan. So I mentioned the board identified a list of projects that were to be funded in part by this county service district back in 2011 as a part of that community planning process. There were 14 road improvements identified at that time. 12 of them are eligible for public funding. We, at the time, were assuming about a 20 or even a 20-plus year build-out of this community. The intent was for revenues to accrue to the district over time, and the funding sources, I'll touch on sort of briefly here, but I think it's a good piece of background. The Transportation Development Tax is a countywide system development charge, essentially, that is collected all across Washington County, including within the cities, when building permits are issued for development that will increase the amount of traffic on the road system. Within North Bethany, the funding strategy included the creation of a specific transportation system development charge. Works very much like the TDT, but it's collected only in the North Bethany area. It's about 3/4 of the total amount of the TDT, and it is in addition to the TDT. So development in this area is essentially paying two transportation development charges. There was a commitment made by the board in 2011 for a fixed amount, about $10 million of Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, or MSTIP funds. That money has been spent some time ago, so we've worked through that component of the funding. Trust and agency is a very small amount. That's money that may be collected from a developer who is unable to complete a required improvement at the time they develop their subdivision, but they deposit those funds with the county and will keep it in the bank until we're able to use it to help fund that future improvement. And then finally, the North Bethany County Service District for Roads itself. It is a special tax district. It's a good time to change slides here. It is a specific property tax district that was created by the voters within the district back in 2011. And it also helps to fund the improvements within this community here. The permanent property tax rate for the district was established at $1.25 per $1,000 of assessed property value. And I'm sorry, I should have said at the beginning too, you can feel free to interrupt if you have any clarifying questions along the way, so don't hesitate. This chart just briefly gives a quick snapshot of the actual service district property tax revenues over time. So if you understand that this was essentially a largely greenfield development, it was mostly farmland back when the district was created in 2011. So you can see the property tax generated in that area was quite low based on that $1.25 per thousand assessed tax rate. And you can see it ramped up fairly quickly as all that new development was happening, and the tax roll has been growing pretty significantly. What we're seeing right now in the last couple of years there, the two lighter blue bars, is that the growth rate is slowing down, but it still continues. But the community is nearing its expected build-out. I'll touch on that on an upcoming slide as well. But we will continue to generate a fairly robust amount, and we anticipate it will be at least a $1.2 million annual revenue from the property tax over time. This chart, again, looking back over the life of the district, it shows the mix of the different revenues that I described earlier. And you can see they vary quite a bit over time. In this chart, the dark blue at the bottom of each of those bars is the property tax. So you can see that it's been climbing over the years. The orange represents that North Bethany Transportation System Development Charge that's specific to this area. The gray is the Transportation Development Tax. And then the light blue at the top is not, apologies, it's not included in the legend, but that was the MSTIP funds. And so that $10 million MSTIP commitment actually was received and expended over a period of 5 years.
What is the yellow? Just curious.
That, I believe, that was our trust and agency. Yeah, that was also kind of a one-time expenditure. We had collected some revenue for a specific need and expended it in that year, 17-18. This slide, I'm a picture person. Tables full of numbers don't really help me much, but I think this is just a useful tool to just sort of describe how all of those revenue sources are tied together and how that translates into actually building projects. So the revenues received from those different funding sources that I mentioned earlier are collected and housed in various funds in the budget. And then we essentially transfer those funds into the North Bethany County Service District for Roads Budget Fund, which is Fund 215 in the budget. And then we also are collecting the property tax revenues the district generates are being deposited in the budget fund for the service district as well. We pool those resources, and then when we actually go to start designing and building a project, we what we call house the project, if you will, for costing purposes in the North Bethany Service District Budget Fund, and then we actually expend the project revenues from that fund. Just a little bit about the status of the area. I mentioned we had assumed about 20 or 20 plus years for the future build out of the community. We're about 11 years in, and we're already almost 90% built out in terms of anticipated development density. So there was an assumption of around 4,200 units was kind of the middle point of a range of estimated units. If we benchmark against that median number of assumed potential units, we're at about 88% build out there. And so you can see we've been moving fairly quickly. The blue on this slide indicates parcels where a building permit has been issued for development, and the orange parcels are the few remaining parcels where there has not been a land use entitlement granted at this point. Likewise, this is a picture of the roads. I mentioned there were 12 streets that are eligible for public funding in this list that was adopted by the board back in 2011. This gives you a little bit of a status update, and it's a kind of busy map, so I'll just explain very quickly here. The solid lines, the solid black lines represent projects that have already been completed. And the red, I'll call them dotted lines, are projects where funding has been committed and we're actually in the process of delivering a project improvement. And you can see the two are Springville Road and a portion of Kaiser Road just north of Springville Road. The projects that have the sort of yellow highlight, those are projects that have been actually completed by the county. And I do want to note that you can see Shackelford Road and some other internal roads have been delivered largely just by private development with no county involvement directly. Our community members who live in the district, you'll be quite familiar with these, but we do like to show where we've made progress. So we do have some improvements on Springville Road. Both the east end and the west end have been completed to their ultimate sort of urban build-out standard. And you see a couple of photos here of what we referred to as Phase 3. This is closer to Kaiser Road. The photo on the left on this slide is the end of the existing improvements that were begun at 185th Avenue and moving to the west, and that currently ends just east of the PCC Rock Creek campus entrance. And then in the foreground on that picture on the left, you see the more current standard where it's a 2-lane road with shoulders and only intermittent sidewalks. There is an existing mid-block crossing in that segment at 173rd Avenue, and that will be retained as we complete what we're calling Springville Phase 4. We'll talk more about. And then we did construct, a number of years ago now, the Urban Road Maintenance District constructed an interim sidewalk that's also within that Springville Phase 4 area that has served the community well for the past several years, but will also be replaced as a part of the Springville Phase 4 project. A few pictures of Kaiser.
1984?
No, sorry, Springville Phase 4.
Right.
And yeah, I want to say that sidewalk was constructed about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, thanks.
And then a few photos of Kaiser Road here. So the first picture on the left is looking south from Brugger Road back towards Springville. So you can see, again, still a 2-lane segment. That is a portion where funding has been allocated, and we're in the design process right now to improve that to urban standard. The second photo is from a similar location, but looking north on Kaiser Road, up toward the Sato Elementary. And you can see, again, still 2-lane road there, still quite rural in character. And then the photo on the far right is taken from a place a little bit further north. You can see it's still within a kind of rural area, if you will, or a rural cross-section on the east side of the road, on the right side of the photo. But looking north, you can see that with development, the road, Kaiser Road, has been improved to that urban standard with bike lanes and sidewalks. So to the budget, this is a very high-level overview of the budget, but what it basically shows us is that we're beginning our budget year with an estimated beginning fund balance of around $17.8 million. We're showing a potential incoming revenue of around $3.6 million, and that's that combination of system development charges, transportation development tax, and property tax revenues. We are budgeting expenditures of around $9.3 million, and that will leave us with an ending fund balance we're projecting of around $12 million. That $12 million is really intended to just be carried over into future years for projects that we have committed to construct. And since those projects happen over a multi-year cycle, the money just rolls forward. I'm actually going to skip this slide. I'm going to...
Robert, I was just wondering, I do have a question. I put in a question to the budget committee, or to the email. Are we gonna, I don't see it necessarily like in the presentation or in the, I can ask the question now.
Yeah, those are being collected and
Okay.
updated in the Q&A document. I know there's one that's coming, a third version coming out in any time now. Yeah.
Okay, so I just didn't know
Hang on a
if we were going.
second. The plan is for us to have the public hearing and adopt today, so it would be necessary for the answers to those questions to come in before we do that. So,
So I was, yeah, I'm wondering if I should ask my question now or if we're gonna get to the Q&A in this document today, because I don't see it necessarily on the agenda, and I don't think it's been sent out as of my email this morning.
Yeah, so we'll review those quickly and have answers
Okay.
for you as soon as we can.
Okay.
And we have drafted the responses to your questions,
Okay.
so we'll be happy to, maybe after we finish the presentation,
Right.
we can just do the Q&A and discussion.
Yep, excellent, thank you.
maybe also, if maybe I wasn't listening properly while I was trying to get the presentation up on a laptop. Did you already talk about the subcommittee, the relationship between the subcommittee and this committee before we go any further into project descriptions?
I did not. Thank you, Chair, for the reminder. She just asked me to do that before the meeting.
One Washington County.
That's right. We all support each other. Yes, and I intended to say that briefly at the beginning. So your budget committee here today, the full budget committee, consists of all 5 of our elected county commissioners, as well as 5 community members that reside within the district itself. We also, in terms of how we develop priorities for projects and think about the sequencing of projects, we engage what we refer to as a budget subcommittee. So Commissioner Treese, because the district is within her geographic district, District 2, and then the chair kind of representing sort of a county-wide perspective, and then our 5 community members. And we did meet in March of this year and checked in about some of the project recommendations that we're going to walk through here with you today. And so thank you for the reminder to just bring that out. So I appreciate that. And I'm going to skip the wordy slide and, oops, this is, okay, okay. Ooh, this is fancy. Okay. I'll go through these one by one then. So really, I mentioned earlier, we're budgeting about $9.3 million in expenditures this year. This slide tries to sort of capture those recommendations and additionally sort of looking at the big picture perspective on some of these projects here. So for those of you that weren't here a little bit earlier, we had a good discussion around cost escalation. That continues to be a factor with all of our work that we're doing. And so on the Springville Phase 4 project, that will be the last remaining segment of Springville Road that needs to be upgraded to urban standards. We have identified that the ultimate cost of that project could be about $2.4 million than we had anticipated at this time last year. So in our discussion as a subcommittee back in March, we did make that known, and our recommendation was to go ahead and sort of either allocate in the current budget year and or earmark, if you will, for future years, those additional funds. So total project cost, we're estimating to be around $16.3 million. I mentioned the portion of Kaiser Road that's in design right now. That project we're estimating now at a total cost to complete of around $7.2 million. That's about $1.7 million more than we had anticipated about a year ago as well. So this was also a discussion with our subcommittee members back in March to allocate an additional $1.7 million in funding for completion of this project. In future years, we're anticipating there are still some other important gaps in the system that will need to be addressed. One of those is what I refer to as the Shackelford Gap. And there have been developments that have completed portions of that project, but we are still missing the connection out to Kaiser Road. So I think this is going to continue to be a topic of discussion for our subcommittee and your budget committee in coming years. We have done a very, very high-level preliminary estimate that that project could cost around $16 million. So it's a big lift for what appears to be a relatively short segment. It's got wetlands, property purchases may be necessary for some pieces of that project, and again, just those environmental constraints will definitely increase the cost of that project. There's still also now a Kaiser Road section, the middle portion, also between the areas to the north, adjacent to the Ridgeline subdivision and the Sato Elementary School, and the portion south of Brugger Road that we're currently in the process of designing and building. And that segment will also need some improvements made to it. There are opportunities to wait for development to occur to allow that work to happen. Because this is the main street area of this area, these are going to be the most expensive projects to develop, and for, I think, that reason have probably been the slowest to materialize in terms of development activity. So again, we'll continue discussing that with our committee members and community in the coming years. And oops, I got these a little bit out of sequence. So this is actually a current year recommendation. So one of the things that we also have suggested is that we'd like to allocate about $250,000 in this coming budget year for the design of improvements to Brugger Road. That would be the last little portion of Brugger Road that has yet to be improved to urban standard. It's abutting the frontage of a parcel that has been acquired by the Washington County Housing Authority. And it appears that it may be several years before that project has funding to be constructed. So we're anticipating this may be an opportunity for us to preemptively go ahead and construct that final improvement on Brugger Road to help serve the community in that intervening period of time until development of that site occurs. And that is it. I don't think we're ready to start the public hearing, but I think we can go back and do the Q&A at this point.
Chair Beachy, I can jump in, and I found your questions, and we can address those if you'd like.
Yep, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question is the difference. What is the difference between the actual beginning fund balance as of 7/1/23 of $15.9 million? You can see that number on page 413 of your budget document, or it's in the presentation on slide number 44.
Would you read the question again, please?
Yeah. So explain the difference between the actual beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2023 of $15,926,11 and the modified 23-24 beginning fund balance of $16,068,805. There's a $148,000 difference. Where was the difference made up? The two budget numbers that I just read are in the budget document on page 413, just for reference, but only one is in the presentation here, because the $15,920,000 is here, the 23. the modified 23-24 is not up here, so it's in the budget document, but I can still explain the difference because the principles are still the same. So the actuals of $15,920,000 in ending fund balance, that was when we ended that fiscal year, that's the amount of dollars that were left over that would be carried forward to the beginning of the next fiscal year. The $16,068,000 in the 23-24 budget was an estimate that was set at the time of developing the budget at the time. So there's going to be a difference because one's an actual number and one's an estimate. What is interesting about these two numbers is they're very, very close. So just me looking at it from a budgetary standpoint, they had a really good idea of where they thought their beginning fund balance would be based on where it actually was.
But I thought also the modified column was representative of our supplemental budgets.
If there was an effect on the budget, it would have changed. But it wasn't probably changed. It was an original estimate, what we thought the fund balance would be during budget development rolling forward.
So why are you using the same header for two different things in the budget book? One where it's estimated and then the other where it's actually reflective of our supplemental budget books?
Well, one is the actuals column,
Yeah.
and the next one is a budget column. So one is where we actually ended up with fund balance, and the other is where we budgeted for the next year.
Is that the modified?
Mm-hmm. And if you look further at the 24-25 proposed budget, $17,815,000, that's the estimate of fund balance into the beginning July of this next year.
And let me clarify, that question came from, I guess I didn't have this. I was going off of the subcommittee memo from March, where it listed the modified 23-24 as the 16 point, and there was an asterisk saying that it was actually 15,920, which is now reflected in the 24-25 budget. But I was going off of two different documents. So I guess, so when it's that deficit there is then, it's just a matter of an adjustment in what we have rolling over.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, for example, as the budget we're looking at now, we're estimating that our fund balance will be $17,815,453 on July 1. When we actually get to the end of this fiscal year and we collect all of our expenditures and our revenue, we'll have an actual number that will be reported next to that.
Right. So, and we'll get it. It comes out in the reserve. The difference
right.
is made up in the reserve. Okay. Thank you.
And you had another question here. Let me get back on. Okay, regarding the budget on page 412 and 413, which we're on, the total budget request is $21,375,548 with $20,746,427 as expenses.
Yeah, and I will clarify again, I was going off of the subcommittee memo numbers, which had the total for 24-25 requested in March as the 21.375. But now it looks like the proposed budget.
So the proposed budget is, the requirements is $9,310,687 with $12,064,861 in contingency.
Yeah, and Chair Beachy,
guess it's
we had a similar discussion in our last committee meeting. The difference between the real spending and the expenditures for budget purposes are different. So for budgeted expenditures, you're going to include that future contingency amount, which essentially makes it look like you're maybe spending more than really will be spent in this upcoming year. Okay. So there's about $9.3 million of projected actual program and project expenditures, and then that $12 million carrying over all counts towards that larger expenditure number.
Right. Okay. But I think, well, you go ahead with the next question on the expenses, I think.
So the last part of that question was, what portion of the expenditures is the 410,000 for Kaiser Road? And what was basically the breakdown of the 21.3? I'm not sure if we answered that yet. Did we? Okay.
I can take that. Chair Beachy, in your question, you captured it pretty closely. The $8.4 million for Springville Road, that is construction funds. So we will be constructing the Springville Road improvements mostly in this budget year. There may be a little bit of carryover into the following budget year. So the $8.4 million is really construction expenditure for Springville. You noted there's about $410,000 that's earmarked for the Kaiser Road improvement, and that is to help fund the design work for that project. And then it will be constructed, we anticipate, beginning early in the next fiscal year as well.
Right. I guess my overall question was, what the breakdown is, and I think we've allocated funding over a couple of different years, and how much has already been spent, and what I think from the subcommittee memo, we didn't have marked down what the expenditures were versus our total estimated budget for the year, and what would be rolled over. So I think that, I'm looking at how much have we already, because we're having to increase the cost by, we need another 1.2 or various amounts, and what has already been spent of that amount, and what, whether it's all within this fiscal year, and what exactly we're paying for during the year.
Right.
For this, for each fiscal year, and how much has already been spent, and whether we need to, how much things are increasing each year that we're having to reallocate money towards.
Yeah. Yes, and that's a really good point, Chair, that the discussions that we have in our subcommittee meetings, those are more, I would say, sort of project planning and longer-term financial planning kinds of conversations, as opposed to the budgeting conversation. So the language changes just a little bit, but it's all very much tied together.
And I can add just a little comment on this, because this is what we talked about in the previous budget committee meeting with URMD, is that as we transform some of our budgeting practices, and one of those is to be able to recognize only current year expenditures in the budget, and those that are expenditures for projects that span more than the single year would be shown as a reserve for future expenditures. So I think under that the information that you see in the budget would match more with what you are seeing in the other subcommittee.
Are there any other questions?
I have one.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you. Steal your mic for a moment. Not so much about the numbers or what we're talking about in terms of your other questions, but just out of curiosity, and if it's too much, you can take it offline. Since this isn't a district that I directly represent, I'm looking at this and saying, did we establish a rate enough to do all these improvements into the future? I remember when we established this district, I remember all the discussion, and I know that the numbers are changing rapidly. Is there, just for my general edification, maybe boring everybody else, but it just doesn't look like the money will be enough to finish out everything that we need to finish out.
It's a really good question, and I'll do my best here. I think based on the information that was available to us and to the board back in 2011, I think we did a pretty good job, I think, of trying to set a realistic rate target and the other funding sources that went into this. As you mentioned, I think the thing that we had not anticipated was just the sheer pace and amount of cost escalation that has occurred over the last particularly 5 to 6 years, I would say. That was not a trend that we had experienced previously, so I think that has definitely hindered our ability to deliver those projects maybe as quickly as we would like. The other real variable here is really just the timing of development. If development gets there first, they build it. If we get there first, we may end up building it, or we defer those improvements. So I think to your question, I think the rate was probably set based on best available information at the time, and I think it will continue to serve us well into the future. It will continue to generate a steady revenue stream each year, And those funds can be either spent on a pay-as-you-go basis, or there is a potential that we could bond against some of that future revenue to help deliver a project or perhaps two smaller projects in a more timely way, but then we would have to essentially allocate a significant amount of those incoming funds towards paying back those bond revenues or the debt on those bonds. So, future year discussions for sure.
I've come up with a few more questions, but I want to open it up to everybody else. Do any of the committee members? Dan? Mr. Reed?
Yeah, thank you. Just kind of another, I guess, bigger picture question. I think in the past, maybe it was last year, there was a question about kind of what's the long-term plan for this subcommittee. Because if we're looking at the map slide, as we wrap up the projects currently in construction, there are only maybe 2 or 3 remaining projects to be constructed, down the road. So I guess what is has there been discussion about kind of a sunset date or a time frame for this subcommittee as those last segments get constructed and we sort of finish off the remaining projects?
Mr. Reed, I would say the short answer is no. I think we may still have a need to enlist your support in thinking about priorities and projects for the next several years, I would guess. And then, of course, because this is an ongoing standing district, there will be an ongoing need for the Budget Committee in perpetuity until the district might at some point in the future potentially be closed out. Okay.
So as these projects get wrapped up, we'll go through a process of identifying additional needs. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. Yeah, we're always going to be thinking 5 to 10 years ahead. So we'll be wanting to, I think, continue engaging your input and support for helping to figure out what those future years will look like for us.
I'm sorry, I got a little confused by that part. You made it sound like there would continue to be more and more projects considered for implementation.
There could be.
Okay.
Right. We have many unknowns, variables that we, and that's why I appreciate the annual cadence. It gives us the opportunity to really check in and revisit assumptions and think.
But I thought the purpose of the district was to build the major arterials and major collectors in this geographic area. Mm-hmm. So, and not the neighborhood streets.
Correct.
So at some point within the blue area on slide 33, all of the planned arterials and collectors of major significance will be done.
Correct.
Okay, so that's when all those projects are completed and closed as construction projects, then the district would go through the process of disbanding.
Correct, right. And I would just add that if there were a determination made by your board eventually to bond against future revenues, that would extend the life cycle of the district in terms of repayment of any bonded obligation too.
Yeah, so we're many years out.
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also reiterate that I think one of the projects listed is there's a half a bridge out there that would connect to 185th, and I think that's really in the long-term plan because that's in the urban growth. That gets into the urban
reserve area.
And then, in the reserve, and whether that gets brought in, which some of us have been advocating for lately. But that's another subject. So, yeah, very, very long term at this point, unfortunately. Okay. Do we have anybody else online?
We just have Member Reed online.
Any other committee members?
Yes. Bruce Young.
Yes, Mr. Young.
He had mentioned before I can say directly, you mentioned it before, that, for instance, Brugger Road and possibly that extension of Shackelford to Kaiser, the county may end up paying for it.
It's air
Air
show
show.
weekend, folks, so.
All right. We hope that's what it is.
Those are fighter jets.
Yeah, I know. What I'm concerned about is if we end up paying money for development that the developers should have paid for, and eventually will, I assume, pay for, do they in fact reimburse us for the money we paid up front to do those projects?
They do not.
Okay.
Yeah, it really is a function of who gets there first in some ways. So there are advantages oftentimes to waiting for development, but then there are the potential drawbacks of the community may be living with substandard infrastructure for some
Sure.
period of time.
I
Yep.
understand that.
Yep. So it's a
I
trade-off.
was just curious about that because, would have been nice. Thank
And
you.
isn't that where the TDT comes in, though? Because you got $725,000 transfer from the TDT fund.
Correct.
And transit development tax is exactly that you're talking about there. So in
Yeah, there
some
is a
regards,
development contribution.
development is paying for a portion of this, not a huge portion, but a portion of it. So at least they showed up and made an ante, I guess, so.
Voter approved up to 28% of their impact, projected impact.
Right. I mean, to follow up, my understanding is that the developer, if they were to be improving the roads, they're getting a tax break basically. And if we're doing that and they don't have to do that, then they're not getting that tax break. I mean, more in plain language.
Right. They get what we call credits, essentially, again, that can offset their payment of the development tax. If the developers are unable to construct improvements that offset their system of development charge or TDT, they do pay cash into the system. So we're receiving improvements from the development community one way or another, directly or indirectly.
Right. So even if we're not getting paid back, they're not getting a credit that they otherwise would have. So
Remember
at least
the
it's,
credit's 28 cents on the dollar. You give me $1, I'll give you 28 cents back. You don't like that game very long.
right. Any other questions from committee members or commissioners? I had a few that have come up this morning as I'm sitting here thinking about it, and as I've driven over and walked over there lately. There is a nice family of deer that are over there, and they are crossing as the development as they've gotten squished, and their living quarters have gotten limited. They're crossing Kaiser Road more and more often, and I'm just wondering about a deer crossing sign. What's the process, or is it in our purview for that, or who might we talk to about something like that?
Yeah, I'll ask our operations and maintenance team or our traffic team. I'm not sure exactly where the line of responsibility falls there, but I'll have someone follow up with you about the process for evaluating that.
Okay. And then I know that that THPRD came in and had to the CPO meeting a few weeks ago. I think it was last month, and I wasn't able to be there. But they are looking at developing, or I think they'd already had reserved land for Parks and Rec, but they actually have a formal plan there for the area, the wetland area behind the church, the Presbyterian church there. And I was just wanted to make sure. I assume you guys talk to each other and are aware, and if any of coordination looking at that section of Kaiser Road development and improvement, that there's coordination there on what's needed.
Yes. Yeah, we're in regular communication with our partners.
Excellent. And then Ridgeline, just right up by Sato Elementary, that development is in full swing, and people are already living there. And the area, that intersection is so wide. I think you had mentioned in our subcommittee meeting, there's just a flashy red light right now, and what about the process to make that a four-way stop and a formal, stop light area?
Yes, thank you. And I'll own up. I think I may have forgotten to respond to that question in writing, so I will take a note to do that. We actually did have our traffic engineering team review the intersection, and based on the information that we have now, even with additional projected development up in that area, we don't believe it's likely to ever meet the warrants for a traffic signal. So the four-way stop may be the long-term improvement there. So we can continue to monitor safety concerns at that location, and if there are things that can be done, like you say, the flashing red to help make sure that people observe the stop signs.
Yeah, I think.
Mayor, could we stick to budget committee questions versus design and operational questions?
Sure.
Because we have a shortened lunch as Board of Commissioners before we have a whole nother afternoon of budget committee meetings.
Okay. Yeah, I think there had been some questions from the subcommittee that we hadn't gotten, we hadn't heard back on. So yeah, there might be, a touch base with the subcommittee, maybe sooner rather than later, as processes. The development is happening fast out there. My one other thing I think that's been brought up before is bus service out there, or in a separate section divided from the rest of Bethany right now. So I know that's been a concern for a lot of the residents. Any other questions from committee members? Okay. All right. I think we can move on to the budget approval if we.
Oh, you want to do public comment
Oh,
first?
the public.
Hearing?
Turn it over to Kevin.
Okay. Mr. Moss.
Thank you,
have any
Chair
public
Beachy.
hearing?
Would any member in our auditorium wish to provide public comment on the North Bethany County Service District roads? As you've heard the presentation, please just raise your hand or start coming forward. Not seeing any in the room. Would any member online wish to provide public comment on this public hearing to the North Bethany County Service District for Roads Budget Committee? Give you just a moment to utilize the raise hand function. Not seeing any hands, Chair Beachy.
Okay, that'll conclude our public hearing. And any other, for budget discussion, any amendments or?
We need to have a motion before we have amendments.
Sure. I move to approve the fiscal year 2024-25 budget for the North Bethany County Service District for Roads as proposed in the amount of $18,310,384, and to levy the permanent property tax rate of 1.25% per $1,000 of assessed value.
That's $1.25
Oh, that is.
per
You're right.
1,000 of assessed value.
I'm
It's
sorry.
okay. We're a team. We got it.
I second the motion.
Hearing a second. All in favor? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, the motion is passed. Thank you.
Good.
All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.